I'm Russ Mitchell. Tonight, America remembers its 38th president.
I, Gerald R. Ford, do solemnly swear.
He helped steady a nation deeply troubled after Watergate, then made a decision that probably cost him an election.
A full, free, and absolute pardon unto Richard Nixon.
Bob Schieffer reports on Gerald Ford, the president. And Hattie Kaufman on the considerable contributions made by his wife, Betty. And the untold secret behind the most famous quote of his presidency.
Our long national nightmare is over.
This is the CBS Evening News with Katie Couric.
And good evening. Katie is off tonight. This evening, America mourns the death of former President Gerald Ford. He died last night at his home in Rancho Mirage, California. He was 93 years old, the longest living former president. His office did not reveal a cause of death, but in August he had an angioplasty and received a pacemaker. Public mourning begins Friday in California, and he will lie in state this weekend at the U.S. Capitol. A state funeral will be held on Tuesday at the National Cathedral, and he'll be buried in his home state of Michigan. President Bush called him one of the most decent and capable men he's ever met.
Americans will always admire Gerald Ford's unflinching performance of duty and the honorable conduct of his administration and the great rectitude of the man himself.
More now on Gerald Ford's extraordinary life. For that, we turn to Bob Schieffer and Bill Whitaker. Bill's in California, where President and Mrs. Ford made their home in recent years, and Bob, who covered Gerald Ford in Congress and the White House, is in Sea Island, Georgia. Bob, we'll begin with you. Good evening.
Good evening, Russ. It is hard to believe just how tense the nation was during those final days of the Nixon presidency. The Secretary of Defense in those days, Jim Schlesinger, had taken special precautions to prevent a military coup. And then one day, Nixon was gone, and we saw this unbelievable scene unfold at the White House. A man who had never been elected to anything but a congressional seat in Grand Rapids, Michigan, was sworn in as president.
I, Gerald R. Ford, do solemnly swear.
It was August 9, 1974, when Gerald R. Ford repeated the presidential oath, succeeding the only president in history to resign. Richard Nixon had just left in disgrace for covering up the Watergate scandal. Now the new president was left to pick up the pieces.
My fellow Americans, our long national nightmare is over.
10 years later, President Ford talked about those days in an interview with CBS News correspondent Phil Jones.
People had lost faith in their government. There was disillusionment about certain public officials. That was a very, very bad time in the history of the country.
His political career began in 1948 with his first successful run for Congress from Michigan. He served 5 presidents before getting the job himself. After a month, Mr. Ford concluded he could not govern until he ended the Watergate aftermath. So on a Sunday morning, he went on television with an announcement that shocked the nation.
Have granted, and by these presents do grant, a full, free, and absolute pardon unto Richard Nixon.
Mr. Ford's honeymoon was over. He was accused of making a deal with Mr. Nixon, something he has always denied.
But I can also assure you, with my hand on the Bible, that as far as I'm concerned, there was no deal whatsoever.
In 1976, after beating back a primary challenge from conservative Ronald Reagan, President Ford sought election to the presidency in his own right. But it was not to be. He lost to Democrat Jimmy Carter. And on Inauguration Day, the new president paid the ultimate tribute to Gerald Ford.
For myself and for our nation, I want to thank my predecessor for all he has done to heal our land.
And that is just the way President Ford said he wanted to be remembered.
I would hope that my history will be written that we healed the country and healed it constructively.
Mr. Ford told me he had to pardon Nixon because he thought it was the only way to give the nation a chance to catch its breath, regroup, and move forward. He was probably right about that, but it cost him dearly. He told me later that he thought it was the primary reason he got beat when he ran for the presidency against Jimmy Carter in 1976 and lost, Russ.
Bob, to the best of your knowledge, did President Nixon in later years ever talk to President Ford about that pardon?
You know, President Ford told me that Mr. Nixon never mentioned it to him, and when I asked him, well, didn't he even say thank you? He said, nope, he never did. He said, but that's Nixon for you.
All day we've been hearing about what a nice guy President Ford was, politics aside. You covered him for years. Is that a fair assessment?
Russ, I will tell you this. In all my years as a reporter, Gerald Ford was the nicest and most decent public figure I ever covered. The nation lost a very good man today, Russ.
Bob Schieffer, thank you very much. Tonight, President Ford's wife, Betty, said his life was filled with the love of God, his family, and his country. Bill Whitaker joins us now from Rancho Mirage, California. Bill, good evening to you.
Good evening, Russ. The 93-year-old Gerald Ford had been in declining health for a number of years. He died here in Rancho Mirage, California last night with his wife Betty and 3 of his 4 children by his side. All across the nation today, flags flew at half-staff in honor of Gerald Ford. This morning, President George W. Bush at his Texas ranch praised the 38th president for applying a steady hand in turbulent times.
The American people came to know President Ford as a man of complete integrity who led our country with common sense and kind instincts.
Condolences, reflections, and praise for Gerald Ford came pouring in today. From California, Nancy Reagan issued the statement that she and late President Ronald Reagan always considered Gerald Ford a dear friend and close ally. His accomplishments and devotion to our country are vast, she said. And over his vast career, Gerald Ford intersected with a who's who of notable political figures. Before he was vice president, Dick Cheney was Ford's chief of staff. In a statement today, Cheney said when Ford left office, he had restored public trust in the presidency and the nation once again looked to the future with confidence and faith. George H.W. Bush was ambassador to China and CIA director under Ford.
And this is his legacy. He came in and he healed, and the rest is history.
Even politicians from the other side of the bench spoke of Ford's basic decency. In 1999, President Clinton awarded him the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Today, Jimmy Carter, who defeated Ford in the 1976 presidential race, called him one of the most admirable public servants and human beings he has ever known. Perhaps because his public life spanned such rocky times, in retirement, Ford sought tranquility. He often could be found playing golf on the links by his desert home in Rancho Mirage, California. He was revered here not only for his political achievements in office, but for his charitable work in retirement.
That's what really made this president so great once he retired, was his approachability and his willingness to work with the community.
He liked to say he was a common man, a Ford, not a Lincoln. And while he walked with the mighty, he never lost his common touch.
He was a kind gentleman, and he got stuck with a job nobody else should ever got stuck with.
One of his sons, Michael, is an ordained minister, and it was Michael who administered the last rites. Russ?
Bill Whitaker, thank you very much. While it's been said that Gerald Ford had few political enemies, there were 2 attempts on his life. In September 1975, Lynette Squeaky Fromm, a follower of Charles Manson, aimed a pistol at the president. 17 days later in San Francisco, another woman, Sarah Jane Moore, fired a shot at him. Both women are serving life in prison. Mr. Ford was also lampooned as a bit of a klutz by comic Chevy Chase, but he was actually a top athlete, having played center on the football team at Michigan. In fact, he turned down offers to play in the NFL and went to law school instead. Earlier, I spoke with Douglas Brinkley, a CBS News consultant, who's writing a book on Gerald Ford. Doug, let me ask you first of all, in your mind, 50 years from now, how will Gerald Ford be remembered?
As a healer, as the person that pardoned Richard Nixon and put Watergate behind us, and then had the courage in April of 1975 to evacuate us out of Saigon. Those will be the 2 main things that Ford accomplished, and he'll get very high marks in our history books for doing a good job in those 895 days.
Well, I think a lot of people forget that Gerald Ford, in fact, was in office in April of 1975 when America's involvement in the Vietnam War ended. You alluded to this, but just how involved was the president in the ending of that war?
Well, deeply. I mean, he came in with a mess on his hands. Everybody was saying, get out. But President Ford launched Operation Frequent Wind, which was the actual evacuation of these helicopter pilots, our helicopter pilots, just rescuing people, saving people, mortar fire going off. And President Ford said, you don't know how hard it was to sit in the White House and watch us lose that war. But he started believing that that ladder was a freedom ladder because his policy, as the new documents show, allowed all of the South Vietnamese that we could bring in to immigrate to the United States. So people out there that are of Vietnamese origin of that generation are in the United States today due to Gerald Ford's policy.
Doug, in a one-month period in 1975, President Ford was the target of 2 assassination attempts, both by women. Why would someone want to assassinate such an affable man?
Well, they were chaotic times, and there were couple of whack jobs that went after him. He made a joke, though, about the attempted attempts on his life where he said, look, these 2 women are going after me. I better support the Equal Rights Amendment.
Doug Brinkley, as always, thank you for your insight.
Thank you.
And for more on the life and legacy of President Ford, please go to our website, cbsnews.com. There's a lot more CBS News ahead, including the fascinating story behind Gerald Ford's most famous line. It's a story we could not tell you until today. And up next, what could be Saddam's final message to his followers and what it could mean for U.S. forces. In tonight's news briefing, a new threat stemming from Saddam's death sentence, plus new information on some Iranian soldiers captured in Iraq. And the government stand on global warming thaws just a bit. We begin with Randall Pinkston in Baghdad.
The U.S. has custody of Saddam Hussein, but must turn him over to Iraq because the law here requires Iraq to execute him within 30 days. A pro-Saddam website threatened retaliation against the U.S. and carried a letter Saddam reportedly wrote that said, "Here I offer myself in sacrifice," and urged Iraqis to direct your enmity towards the invaders. Defiant words from a former ruler who will soon hang like any other Iraqi criminal sentenced to death. The only question is when.
I'm David Martin at the Pentagon. U.S. intelligence is interrogating 2 senior members of Iran's Revolutionary Guards captured last week inside Iraq. U.S. officials say the 2 carried documents directly linking the Iranian government to attacks on American troops. According to these officials, the captured documents show Iran was providing weapons, including advanced explosive devices, to one of Iraq's Shiite militias and helping them plan future operations in Baghdad. The 2 Iranians were captured in a compound belonging to the powerful Shiite leader Abdul Aziz al-Hakim, who earlier this month met with President Bush in Washington.
I'm Thalia Shuris at the Interior Department, where today the federal government for the first time recognized the threat to polar bears from global warming. Arctic studies have shown that the population of the world's largest predator is shrinking dramatically as the sea ice they hunt from melts around them. The government now proposes listing polar bears as a threatened species. The designation would ensure that Arctic operations like oil exploration or commercial shipping would not jeopardize the bears or their habitat. Environmentalists hope the designation will eventually push the government to cut back on greenhouse gases that they claim contribute to global warming. Thalia Ashuris, CBS News.
And now some news you can take to the supermarket. Tomorrow, the Food and Drug Administration is set to announce that meat and milk from cloned animals is safe to eat. Federal scientists have concluded there's no difference between food from clones and food from conventional livestock. And a quick note on campaign 2008. Democrat John Edwards says he will make a second run for president. Officially, the announcement will come tomorrow in New Orleans. Edwards arrived there today. The campaign actually got ahead of itself, breaking the story today on its website. An Edwards advisor says better a day earlier than a day late. And just ahead this evening, quick cash at a very high price. Interest rates of 300%, and you may lose your car. The dangers of title lending. Next. A warning tonight for borrowers about a certain type of loan. It is marketed as a quick way to get needed cash, but it comes at a steep cost. Annualized interest rates hovering around 300%, and perhaps the loss of your vehicle. Mark Strassman reports in tonight's Eye on Your Money.
Now I'm raising 3 kids by myself, and I just didn't want to be homeless.
Home care provider Felicia Scrubb was way behind on bills, but the emergency loan that was supposed to bail her out became her real crisis. She borrowed $450 from a so-called car title lender. It's a short-term, high-interest loan. Borrowers use a car they own as collateral. The lender keeps your car's title and sometimes copies of its keys. Fall behind on the payments, an issue for many borrowers, and you could lose your car, which is often worth much more than the amount you borrowed. Felicia could barely pay the extraordinary 25% monthly interest, never mind repaying the $450 she had borrowed. 5 months after she took out her loan, on Christmas Eve 2004, her car was repossessed.
I'm like, how am I gonna get to work? How am I gonna pay my bills? It's just, it was terrible.
Her lesson learned?
Just read the fine print, the small print.
And it was the interest that got you?
It was the interest.
Only 14 states allow car title loans. Most states say they violate usury laws. The industry argues these loans help people who can't qualify for financing elsewhere. Felicia Scrubb recently got a new car, but says the only one helped by her original loan was her lender. Mark Strassman, CBS News, Jonesboro, Georgia.
Just ahead, the real story behind Gerald Ford's most famous quote and why he almost never said it. And no story about President Ford is complete without Betty Ford. We'll take a look at her accomplishments next. Jerry and Betty Ford were together for nearly 6 decades, and you'd be hard-pressed to find a closer couple. Betty Ford's humor, candor, and courage made her so popular, but by the time President Ford ran for re-election in 1976, bumper stickers appeared that read, "Vote for Betty's husband." Hattie Kaufman reports on the accidental First Lady.
Help me, God.
It wasn't just Gerald Ford who found himself suddenly in the White House. It was a surprise for the new First Lady as well.
We didn't have much time to get ready. It wasn't like my husband was elected to the position. We were moved in 9 days after he was sworn in.
Suddenly you were First Lady. And almost as suddenly, Betty Ford was diagnosed with breast cancer. In an interview in January 2003, Mrs. Ford told me she never regretted sharing the news of her mastectomy.
I think they felt that it would be helpful.
A lot of women are alive today, thanks to Betty Ford going public.
It was unusual at that time.
Were you very self-conscious afterwards?
I certainly was. I was always thinking, well, I suppose that first appearance they're going to look and say, which one was it?
Oh. Betty Ford also displayed courage discussing another subject taboo in the 1970s, her addiction to alcohol. Part of her enduring legacy is the establishment of the Betty Ford Center for Addiction Treatment. Facing her own problem wasn't easy.
Fortunately, my family saw the problem. I think I was moved when they said, "We love you too much, Mother, to let you go."
Sometimes Betty Ford and her outspoken nature made more news than her husband, the president. She advocated women's rights and legalized abortion, seemed to be understanding of marijuana use and premarital sex.
Well, some have said that you really defined the role of a modern First Lady.
Well, I think they're stretching the point a little.
President and Mrs. Gerald Ford.
In recent years, she chose to focus on her husband's declining health. They were married 58 years.
It's been a great trip.
Hattie Kaufman, CBS News, Rancho Mirage, California.
And finally this evening, we wanted to share with you the story behind Gerald Ford's most famous quote, told by Mr. Ford himself. He shared it with our former CBS colleague Phil Jones back in 1984 during an interview that was not to be aired until after Mr. Ford's death. So here it is for the first time.
The country will always remember that stirring speech of yours when you took over.
My fellow Americans, our long national nightmare is over.
Did you really believe it was over when you said that?
That's an interesting thing, Phil. You know Bob Hartman, who was my principal speechwriter, and Bob put together a draft. I read it, and that phrase, the long national nightmare, sort of jarred me. And I said, Bob, we really ought not to use that. Let's not be too harsh. Let's not be too dramatic. And Bob really put his foot down and he said, that is an accurate expression of what has taken place, and you've got to keep it in the speech. So after thinking about it and talking to Betty about it, we decided to leave it in, and boy, in retrospect, I'm awfully glad we did.
And we spoke to former presidential speechwriter Bob Hartman today. He's now 89 years old, and he told us President Ford had resisted his national nightmare line because, quoting now, he didn't want to say anything bad about anyone. Ford had only one major fault: he was too nice a guy, end quote. CBS News will bring you special coverage throughout the ceremonial state funeral for President Ford. For tonight, that's the CBS Evening News. I'm Russ Mitchell in New York. Good night.